am I even looking for?
Okay, so this is just continuing on the previous video. So if you haven't seen the first part, please go back and watch it because this won't make as much sense if you haven't seen the first video. So anyways, we were talking about how one can determine truth without just assuming a certain religious perspective or a certain other perspective. And what we're finding is, okay, we gave the example of the crucifixion of Jesus. How can we determine whether or not he was crucified? Because there are different perspectives on that based off of different religious points of view. One is the perspective of Christianity, that Jesus actually was crucified based off of the belief in the New Testament as the inspired, inerrant Word of God. And the other is the belief that Jesus was not crucified, which is subscribed to by many Muslims, probably the vast majority of Muslims, based off of the belief that the Quran is the inspired, infallible Word of God, and that the Quran teaches that Jesus was not crucified. And so this is the conundrum. Well, how do you go about determining what is actually true? You can't just assume one belief or the other and then use that to determine it, because you end up with circular reasoning. Well, I believe that this sacred writing is true, and this sacred writing says that this is what happened, therefore that thing is true. Well, no, that's skipping a number of steps, and it ends up being a circular form of reasoning. In other words, you can't assume your belief in order to prove that very same belief. So, when it comes to this issue of the crucifixion, as we described coming to the end of the last video, all historians actually believe that Jesus was crucified, not based off of religious reasons or presupposing a certain writing to be even historically accurate. It's just based off of the collection of historical data that we have with us in the present. So we have things in the present that inform us of the past. That's how a question of the past can be settled. But it's real things that we have. It's not just a presupposition or belief or conception or anything like that. We have real artifacts, real texts, real things like that that actually inform us of the past. Now, I want to bring it into a slightly more contemporary example in order to highlight this a little bit more. So all of you who are watching this video right now, obviously you are watching something which is a record of a past event. In other words, I am making this video and actually talking right now to this camera before you're watching it on YouTube. You know, it takes time to go through, edit things, put it on YouTube, uploading it, and then post it somewhere. Well, whether you're watching this on YouTube or Facebook, you know, there's time that goes by. So you are actually, right now, watching this video, you are experiencing something in the present. You have something real, real physical data presently before you that is informing you concerning something in the past. Now, here's the thing. What if I right now make a claim? How do you determine whether that claim is true? So I'll make a claim. Right now, I am in a vehicle. Right now being when I am making this video, not while you're watching it. How do you determine whether or not that's true? Well, I know that sounds like a very obvious question, or the answer seems very obvious, because you're looking right now at this video and you can see the interior of a vehicle, which I am in. So what if I was outside of my vehicle right now, and you could see the vehicle behind me while watching this video, and I made the same claim? If I said, I am in a vehicle right now, referring to the time in making this video. Well, if I was outside and you could see that, and I'm not in the vehicle, then you would know that that statement is not true. So if I'm in the vehicle and I say I'm in the vehicle, it's true. If I'm out of the vehicle and I say I'm in the vehicle, it's true. Well, what really makes the difference? Suppose I'm standing outside of the vehicle and I close my eyes and I imagine I'm in a vehicle. And I say, I'm in a vehicle. Does that make it true? Well, I think all of you will agree, no, that doesn't make it true. So what really makes the difference? Well, what you can see is that what makes the difference is what actually physically was, or if its present circumstance is, the situation. Material reality is actually what makes the difference between a claim being true or claim being not true. A statement which corresponds to material reality is actually a true statement. A statement which does not correspond to material reality is not a true statement. So even if I go and I imagine that I'm in the vehicle, and I say I'm in the vehicle while imagining it, well, that imagination and the statements that I make do not correspond to physical reality, and thus are not true. Sure, you can say it's true that I'm imagining it, but that's true than me being here. And the reason why it would be true that I would be imagining it is because that's what is physically happening in the real world. So this is a very, very basic idea. So if you've noticed by now, we have actually now determined what truth is, how you can go about determining it, and thus you can now test all claims. So what does it mean for the statement Jesus was crucified to be true? What does it mean to say Jesus is crucified and that's a true statement? Well, what that's saying is that actually in material reality, Jesus was crucified. That's really what it means. You can do this with anything. Give any example of, well, what is it that is actually true? And you can think of many, many things. There's a difference between what really happens and just conceptualization. Getting hit by a car in material reality is very different from being hit by a car in a dream. Why? And what makes one real and the other not real? What makes one true and the other not true? Well, the thing that makes it real, if you actually get hit by a car rather than just dreaming about it, is that it really took place in material reality. You can see that is the distinguishing point. This has so many implications. We won't be able to go through all of them now in this video, but I ask you all to consider it deeply. One of the implications, of course, is that we can actually discern what true claims are and what claims are actually not true. Any claim that someone makes, if it does not correspond to physical reality, you can then know that the claim is not true. If someone makes a statement and it does correspond to physical reality, it is actually true. Now, of course, one of the very broad implications of this is that if someone proposes something to be a reality, but claims it not to be, or claims it more accurately, claims it to not be material or to not be physical, notice what's happening. We've already found that by definition, something that is not, any statement that is not corresponding to the material world is by definition not true. It's by definition not true, not existent, not real. It's just a claim that doesn't correspond. It's just a counterclaim to reality. So if someone says, well, I believe that this exists, but it's not physical, but it's not material, well, what is being done is they're actually absolutely destroying, unknowingly, most likely, but absolutely destroying the only means that we have to distinguish between what is true and what is not. They're actually destroying the definition of truth. And I've done this myself. I used to believe that there's a such thing as non-physical or non-material realities. I didn't really know what that meant, and I couldn't really conceive of it other than in ways which basically are material. I mean, if you conceive of a material thing, if you conceive of an immaterial thing, a non-material thing, how can you conceive of it except in material ways? Well, you think, it's kind of like this. Well, and what is the this? Well, it's going to be something material, something tangible, something that you can actually conceive of because you've experienced something like it, or at least you've experienced things that are similar to the component parts, which then you assemble together in your imagination. But the fact of the matter is, claims of non-physical realities are by definition false. We've determined that. And think about this. If you then say, no, even though whether or not a statement corresponds to materiality, the material world, even though that is what determines truth or error, whether it corresponds or does not correspond, that being the case, even aside from that, I'm going to believe that these non-material, non-physical things can be true too. Well, then how do you go about determining what non-material claim is true against another non-material claim? Someone might say, well, I believe that, around us right now is a non-material or non-physical liquid type, immaterial substance, something like that. And then someone else says, well, no, I believe that it's not a liquid type thing, it's more of a gas type non-physical thing. Well, what means can you possibly have to determine that? In other words, how do you determine between one proposed non-physical thing and another proposed non-physical thing? Non-matter, non-physicality can only be defined by what it is not. It is not material, not matter, non-physical. You can't actually describe what it is. And the reason why is because non-physical, non-material, immaterial, all of those words are actual synonyms in practical reality with non-existent. Why? Well, it's because existence is determined. Existence, truth, reality, those things are all roughly synonymous. A claim which corresponds to reality, to existence, is actually true. Claims which do not are not true. So, again, this is very vast in its implications, and I encourage you all to think about it a lot and to ask, have I been believing things because I've just presupposed a certain system of belief? Or have I actually done tests to see if this claim or that claim actually corresponds to the real material world? I know that I myself have held many beliefs that I had not tested to see if they correspond to the way things really are in the physical world. But I now recognize that I had no genuine justification for believing those things. No more justification than anyone else has for believing things on the same basis, whether it's a religious belief or what have you. So here's the thing. We can determine what is truth. We can test things according to material reality and thus know the truth. That is an infinitely stronger foundation than simply believing something for any other reason. So I encourage you all, investigate these things, test your current beliefs, see if they are actually true. And I also encourage you all to seek truth with an understanding of what truth itself really is. Seek truth. And that's where true freedom is. So, anyways, I hope that this has been helpful for everyone here watching this video, and that it has clarified some things for you. If you would like to discuss this, please comment or send me a message in any other way if you know how to, if you have any of my personal contact information or anything like that. So anyways, blessings to you all, and farewell.
What am I even